right, team. We are back in the Fireside PM podcast, and I have Jess Gilmartin back on the show. I think it's been like a year and a half or so. So welcome back, Jess. I know last time we talked about like culture bugs, but this time we're going to talk about how to pick a CMO. Like, how do you evaluate CMO talent? How do you pick the right one for your company? Welcome back, and how are you?
Thank you. I am great. Yeah, since we last spoke, I left full-time work and have been doing full-time advisory and interim CMO work. And so I actually spent a lot of time with founders and CEOs on this subject. So it's a subject that's very near and dear to my heart.
I love it. Why don't we start for a refresher, since so many of the audience for this show are PMs, and there's a perception of what marketing does from a PM point of view and what CMOs do. I think, like most things, we don't really get what it's like being a CMO and what the raison d'etre for a CMO is, as well as you would. Maybe we could start there. Like, why does a company even need a CMO, and what do they do?
Yes, I mean, I think CMOs are very important. One could argue otherwise, but ultimately, I think the CMO is the steward of the brand. And so we think about the customer, and the customer can be defined in many, many different ways. So when I think about a CMO, I think of the customer as our external customer. I think of the customer as our internal customer, so our employees. And I think of our customer as all the folks out in the world that engage with us in some way, whether that is investors, potential investors, and potential employees. And so our job is to create the best possible brand and the most consistent possible brands that makes all of our customers, really understand and love our brand.
When you say brand, I think a lot of PMs think, okay, yeah, that's great. We're going to build the awesome product, and then the marketing people will package it up and talk about it. I suspect you think of brand as more upstream as well.
Yes.
But share more how you think about brand.
Yeah, so brand is every interaction that a customer has with your company and making sure that it is consistent and delightful. So part of your brand is what you say on social media. Part of your brand is your customer support. And that's something that people forget a lot about. Part of your brand is the interactions with the product, with the website, with events. Basically, any time that any external or internal customer touches your company or engages or interacts with your company, I want that brand experience to be excellent and consistent.
So what do you do when you're at a meeting where the head of product and their team is like talking about this exciting new thing, and you're like, I don't know if that's delightful for the user, because there are these often silos in tech, organizations, and they don't report up to until like maybe the CEO sometimes. So how do you engage with the product team, given that you feel joint accountability for the brand, which involves every interaction between the user and the product as well?
Yeah, it's really hard. And I really see myself as the intermediary between a lot of competing interests. And that's actually what makes marketing really hard, is that you're often stuck in between sales, marketing, product, customer support, and marketing often has to be that bridge. And so usually my job, so I try not to have strong opinions about product. That's not my job. If I wanted to have strong opinions about a product, I would be a product leader. But I deeply understand customers, and I deeply understand the experience that we want. And so typically if I'm seeing something that I'm concerned with, whether it's in sales or support or products, it happens all the time. My job is to bring all the people together and to just basically raise a fuss. And I'm very good at that. That's probably one of my strongest points. And I think it's really important as the CMO is to be opinionated, but to also pick your battles. You can't raise your fuss all the time. And so, really my job, and honestly, I typically know less than, for example, my head of product marketing. So I find that a good head of product marketing is always seeing, 3 to 4, sort of like days, years ahead of me. And they can kind of see all of the issues that I can't see. And so I'm really relying on my head of PMM to say, hey, Jessica, like, I'm really worried about this. I don't think this is going to be a good experience. They typically don't have the pull. And so then that's when my job is to come in and bring the CEO together, the head of product, the head of support, head of sales, to get in a room and kind of say, hey, what's the experience that we are currently contemplating? This doesn't feel right. How do we get to a better result?
It's so interesting. Just even hearing you say that brings my PM blood pressure up a little bit, because I'm like, oh, come on, man. We worked on this. Let's ship it. But
But,
I'm,
I would say
yeah.
that there's a lot of product people
Mm-hmm.
who don't spend as much time with customers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so oftentimes something sounds great in theory, but then there's just the reality of what it is like. And also you mentioned silos. What I have found a lot of times in almost every organization is that the product team operates in silos. You've got your like analytics PM team, you've got your AI PM team, you have your, admin PM team, whatever that is, and they're not talking to each other. And so in the analytics PM team may be creating something that works really well for analytics, but they're not thinking about the full user experience because there are other things that are happening. But, PMM's marketing is seeing that, because our job is to look across all of the different PM teams. So that is absolutely the number one escalation that I get is, hey, like, this team is not talking to this team and they're doing things that are in conflict, or they're doing things that are creating a really poor customer experience. And so our job is to flag that and say, you guys have to figure out how to work together and create something that is very coherent and consistent for the customer.
Very fair, Jessica. Very fair. Let's say that there's a company that already has like a director of marketing or a head of product marketing. They don't have a CMO. When does a company need a CMO? Like, at what are the signs that, like, okay, things are fine, and now to take it to the next level, you need this kind of C-level marketing leader?
One of the biggest mistakes that I see is hiring a head of marketing too early. I do not believe you should hire a head of marketing or any senior marketing leaders until you have true product market fit. And for a whole lot of reasons, but mainly because the goal of getting to product market fit is that you should be able to do it without spending a lot of money. So if you're spending a ton of money on marketing, you're just basically pouring money into a very leaky bucket. And also and by the way, I have been here. I've been a CMO at a company that did not have product market fit. So I deeply understand the pain of that. So what happens is that marketing becomes this crutch, and everyone goes to marketing and says, hey, if you just like fixed our Facebook ads, or if you fix the title on the homepage, everything will miraculously be better. And that's not at all the case. And so when you have marketing too early, then everything becomes about the marketing and these things that are actually unimportant. And when you don't have marketing, then the founders have to be the ones to do the things that they need to do, which is get out, talk to customers, do a bunch of research, do rapid product iteration, and you're not spending money on marketing, which is actually not at all valuable. So I would say number one is wait until you have product market fit. And then when you have product market fit and things are going well, you are seeing good customer acquisition, you're seeing retention, you're seeing, happy customers, good CSAT, then that's when you say, okay, you know what? I think this is time to put some fuel on the fire and hire some marketing leadership.
What advice would you give a CMO who comes across this interview who says, well, I am in a place that doesn't yet have market fit? They thought they did, but now we don't. What do they do? Do they leave, or what role can they play? Because it sounds like they would be under a lot of pressure to poke around the edges, and they might become a scapegoat as well.
Yeah, 100% they will. I mean, that's what happened to me with this one company, is that I realized that we just didn't have product market fit. We were spending a bunch of money. It just wasn't worth it. And so I tried so hard to really kind of educate these first-time founders about, what do they need to do? Because I can't build product. I can't do iteration. I mean, that's just not who I am. I'm not a product leader. So I was the one that was talking to customers, giving the insights to them, trying to help them understand and it just didn't work. And so, I think ultimately, if you are a head of marketing, if you're a CMO at a company that doesn't have product market fit, I just think unless you want to become a product leader, I think it just doesn't necessarily make sense for you to be there. And by the way, there's a really big difference between a head of marketing and a CMO. And you probably shouldn't hire a CMO until you're way far down the path. That a CMO is probably when you're a Series C company, a Series D company. You're typically looking for a director or a VP of marketing when you are hiring your first head of marketing.
What is the biggest difference between a head of marketing and a CMO in terms of like the capabilities and competencies?
So you'll get, if you ask 1,000 people, you'll get 1,000 different answers. So I'm going to give you the Jessica answer, which other people might be listening and say that's absolutely not right, but this is my answer. So when I think about, at least for my own path, and when I think about the CMOs that I've met versus like directors or heads of marketing, it's really the scope of the experience and the role. So when I was a CMO, I had very senior marketing leaders underneath me that did 90% of the day-to-day work. So I had a VP of product marketing, a VP of communications, a VP of growth. And they really handled all the day-to-day of marketing. I actually did very little marketing, but I was thinking about the company. So I spent most of my time on like crisis communications and internal communications and employee engagement. I spent so much time really around influence in the executive team. And so the role was just very broad, and going back to thinking about these very big strategic issues of the company. That's like generally where I spent my time. When I think about myself earlier in my career, when I think about the earlier stage head of marketing that I advise, they are very much in the weeds. They are thinking about marketing all the time. They are thinking about, the Google ad strategies. They tend to have less experienced marketers underneath them. So they have to spend 90% of their time thinking about the day-to-day of marketing. So, obviously when you are a 20-person company, do you need somebody thinking about your crisis communication plan? You do not. But that does make a lot of sense when you're a $100 million, $200 million company. So it's just, you just want to make sure that, and I will say as we get to what are some of the biggest mistakes, number one biggest mistake is hiring someone that is too senior or too junior for you relative to where you are in your needs.
Yeah. So if you bring in a CMO when a lot of the blocking and tackling is being handled well by the current marketing leaders, the directors or senior managers or whatever, how do you measure success for that CMO? Like, how do you know if those other things that are higher level are really moving the needle for shareholders?
So one of the biggest things that I talk about with founders is, what are your biggest challenges? And typically the challenges fall into one of two buckets. So one is that they have a reasonable demand gen engine and function, and they feel pretty good about that, but they have a relatively weak product marketing function, and they feel like their brand and their messaging just isn't strong enough. So oftentimes they're in a very sort of competitive, fast-moving market. They have not been able to figure out how to break through with their messaging. And usually it's their investors that are saying, hey, like, we just don't feel like you are appropriately articulating your unique differentiation. And they don't have a head of marketing or a head of PMM that is strong enough in understanding, like, who is their ICP, what's the messaging that breaks through. And then that's a really big pain point for them. That's sort of one side. The other side is they feel like they've got pretty good messaging differentiation, but they just don't have a working demand gen engine. They don't have repeatable pipeline. Their sales team is frustrated, or they're just not making their numbers consistently. And so it's really important to understand when you're hiring a head of marketing, which is the thing that is the most important to you. You're not going to be able to find a head of marketing that is deeply experienced and is an expert in both. And so figure out the one that you need the most, and also figure out, on the existing team, where do you already have strengths? So if you already have a super strong PMM leader and your issue is demand gen, don't hire a head of, CMO that is a really strong PMM. Otherwise, you're just duplicating the work. So I think from a success perspective, it really is saying, what are the goals that we need to hit? So for example, if your issue is demand gen, that's really easy. Like, are you hitting your numbers? Are you getting your pipeline that you promised? From a brand perspective, if you're worrying about like, hey, we just need to be there in the world and we need to show up better, it's a little bit harder, but a lot of that comes down to brand measurement surveys, understanding, are you now in consideration where you warrant? Are people hearing about you and talking about you? Do they know about you when they didn't know that before? That's typically how we sort of look at brand awareness.
Yeah. Now, if you are aspiring to become a CMO, I'm guessing, is it that, well, you've got to be great at all of those types of problem solving, or are there different flavors of CMOs and people become specialized and I'm the demand gen CMO or that kind of thing?
Yeah, this is the hardest thing about marketing, and this is why marketers last for 2 years on average, because I personally think it's one of the hardest jobs, because the CEO typically has extremely unreasonable expectations about what marketers can do. So we have sort of a span of control that is ridiculously wide. The same team is thinking about our influencer strategy, that's thinking about super creative ads, that's thinking about our marketing analytics, that's also thinking about our launching products. Like, it's just the span is so wide. It's impossible for one leader, no matter what they have done, to be good at everything. It is absolutely impossible. And so marketers typically tend to come up through one of three ways. One is through brands. So they tend to be content writers, or they have worked at, great consumer brands. They know how to do really big campaigns. They know how to do beautiful storytelling. That's like one typical path. They tend to be much more creative. They don't tend to be as demand gen oriented, which makes sense. Then you've got the growth folks that are very numbers oriented, and they tend to just not be great storytellers, not have a lot of PMM experience. And then you've got the third, which is PMM. And again, very obvious. They tend to be great with product, great, very strategic, not great with numbers. They tend to be, they don't have a lot of demand gen experience. And they also just don't have a lot of brand experience. So you got to pick. And that's the hardest part for founders, because they're like, well, I want everything, kind of everything. And so again, going back to what is the most important thing for you at this moment, that's what you have to figure out and hire that profile. And what I always tell founders is, don't worry about long-term, worry about what you need for 2 years. So if you are worried that someone is going to, you're going to grow out of this person in 2 years, it doesn't matter. Hire the person. If demand gen's your biggest issue, don't worry about what you're going to need in 2-3 years. Worry about building a demand gen engine for the next 2 years and hire that person.
Oh, so it could be that a very successful CMO changes jobs every 2 or 3 years because they're so good at helping their companies, hit that major 2-year thing, and then the problems are different and they don't align as well with that CMO's skill set. Is that
100%,
fair?
100%. Yeah.
Interesting. All right, now
very different than other C-level functions.
Yeah, that's a tight cycle. I mean, you could say in product, maybe there's like the early stage kind of scaling and then kind of like hyper scaling type phases that you could imagine CPOs, wanting to kind of change things up, but that not every 2 years. That would be crazy.
Yeah. And not to say that it's not to say that every CMO leaves after 2 years. I have just found that is very common. And I have found that, after two years or so, I mean, obviously it could be a year and a half, it could be 3, but I have found that just the problems of the company change so much. And the reason you brought that marketer in, they have solved a lot of those problems, and then just a new set of problems come, and it's just different, and you just need somebody else who is laser focused on that thing.
Okay, let's talk about the scenario where the founders are like, yeah, we do need a CMO. It's time. We have market fit. And we posted this job posting, and now we have 1,000 applicants.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you figure out who's the right CMO for your company?
Yeah. So the number one thing I'd say is do not get dazzled by former companies. Don't get dazzled by someone that worked as a senior PMM or a director of PMM at a brand name company that you admire, because that really rarely translates to someone being successful in a startup role, because they just haven't had the depth and breadth of experience. So if you're hiring a director of PMM from a great company, from a 50,000 person enterprise company, their role is actually going to be really narrow. And they're going to come into a startup and have no idea what to do. You know, they will not know how to build a marketing analytics team from scratch. They will not think about the ways to bring together an entire marketing team. They probably have never even seen demand gen. They've never worked with a PR team, like all of the different functions they just haven't seen. And so that's again, like going back, I've seen a lot of mistakes. That's one of the by far most common mistakes, is thinking that because someone was very successful at a big company, they'll be successful as a startup head of marketing. It's almost universally not true. I love to find people that were entrepreneurs. I love to find people that were at startups, that were mid-level. I mean, you're looking for people that that are operating from first principles, that are scrappy, that are like thinking about the latest tools and technologies, that understand how all of the pieces fit together, because it is extraordinarily complex. And know how to hire different leaders well, because a really big part of marketing is hiring a great head of MOPS, marketing operations, a great head of marketing analytics, a great head of growth, a great head of product marketing. You can't do that if you've never actually seen that before.
Yeah, so I could see the founders being tempted to hire from companies are maybe a little bit ahead of where the company is today, because they're like, well,
yes,
that person has seen this movie before. They know where we're trying to go.
Yes.
And it sounds like your thinking is like, well, they know like one piece of 100-piece puzzle of where you're trying to go.
Yes. Yes. So you have to make sure you understand what parts of the movie they have seen, and what parts they were responsible for. You know, if they built if they supplied the food, right? If they were like the food person for the movie, that's not as helpful as if they were the director. And so I think that that's really important, to dig really, really deep and understand how much they understand about building strong teams, how they would put together plans. So one of the advisory roles that I do very often is I actually work with founders to hire their CMOs. And so I, hire the search firm, I build the spec, I do the interviews, I, write the panel presentation. And it's all because founders don't know this. They don't know how to evaluate marketers. But it really is all about understanding how somebody thinks about all the pieces and how deeply they understand how the pieces fit together. They don't have to be experts. Like I couldn't create a Facebook ad if my life depended on it, but I don't have to, but I understand how to hire good people and how to think about the strategy behind it and how that relates to all the other things that we're doing.
You mentioned a number of elements of the evaluation process. How do you think about the signal to noise ratio of like your traditional one-on-one behavioral interviews versus case interviews versus those panel presentations? Like, do you find that like most of the signal is in one of them, or is it like a combination? How does that look for you?
I would say, so I don't do a case interview. I can't imagine what a case interview would be like. But we do one-on-one interviews obviously first, and we meet with, we typically have the head of marketing candidates meet with everybody. To be really honest, I don't take a lot of the feedback very seriously from most of the executives. I don't find that most of them know how to properly evaluate marketing talent. they're mainly looking for cultural fit, and that's fine. I mean, that's, that's reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
But I dig very deeply into their experience. And I'm mainly looking to understand how much they can, first of all, how interested they are in the company, how much research they've done in the company, and can they apply the work that they've done in the past to the problems that I know the company has. So when I'm interviewing a head of marketing candidate, I'm always interviewing them in the lens of, hey, I know what the problems of this company are. So have they solved similar problems? I don't care about have they solved other problems. That's immaterial to me. I care about have they solved these problems. And so you typically filter through, probably, 20% of the people get through that initial screening. And then I typically like to have 2 to 3 people go through a panel presentation. And of course, that's where you get the ultimate signal. And so every single candidate, regardless of the position, it doesn't matter what position I'm hiring for, everybody that I hire has to go through a full panel presentation. And I typically do not ask them to do, I think it depends. For more junior folks, I ask them to do a case from, sort of a presentation from something they've done in the past.
Mm-hmm.
For CMO candidates, I will ask them basically to put together a full plan. I'll say, this is your budget. These are the problems. I want to see what your plan would be for this company.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. When you get the, 2 or 3 candidates doing that panel presentation, what makes a great one versus like just a good one?
So probably the 2 biggest areas are, one is the being articulate. So it's amazing, even with head of marketing candidates, how inarticulate many of them are. They run on, they don't get to the point. They just don't share their ideas crisply, where you leave feeling like, okay, I really understood what they were saying and I really got it. Mm-hmm. I'd say that's number 1, and just inspiration. The number 2 is specificity of plans. So what I've found with marketers and heads of marketing is that they can be very broad and very non-specific. And so you kind of like, yeah, that all makes sense. I mean, I guess, yes, we would definitely do paid marketing. Mm-hmm. But that's easy to say. I mean, you could ask ChatGPT and they can come up with a marketing plan. And it really is that specificity of, okay, have you done your research? Do you understand the problems that this company has? Do you have a very specific set of tactics that I believe would be successful for this company? And that is where I feel like a lot of people end up falling down, is on that level of specificity, where I want to learn something. I want to say, yeah, like that's really exciting, and I can absolutely see that working. Versus, okay, like how to build, you know that we need to have paid ads. Well, great, everybody does. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows that. We need to have PMM. Well, everybody knows that. What's the 2 to 3 levels deeper, where I'm like, yeah, okay, you deeply understand this, you get it.
You mentioned ChatGPT. Do you ever get concerned that the material they're presenting is largely AI generated, or can you spot it pretty easily?
No. ChatGPT is great for a lot of things. It is certainly not good enough to put together a strong CMO presentation.
Tell me about a CMO presentation where you were like, whoa, that person, that's the one, like slam dunk. Like, what was it about it that made it really kind of still memorable even today?
I think they had a level, I think it's about passion. And so mm-hmm. It's about how do they show that they are inspiring, excited, they can excite other people. And I think for me, the biggest thing that I always want to see is someone that is pushing the envelope. And so a lot of what I'm seeing, especially with a lot of senior marketers, is they have a playbook and they just bring the playbook from place to place. And mm-hmm. Marketing is changing so fast with so much technology. And so when I see somebody that's really exciting, when I've seen, really stand out presentations, is when people are talking about all of the latest tools and what they would do and how they inspire people. And actually, we just did this. I'm an interim CMO right now. We just hired a full-time CMO, and he made me laugh because he was showing these crazy potential, very challenger type slogans and that we would use on our website, that we would use in ads. And I was like, man, this is way bolder than I'd ever be. And I love it because I think that kind of energy is what this company needs. And so that was, to me, it really stood out as someone that is going to come in and challenge things and is going to shake things up, because he was just thinking in a way that I don't think. And I loved that.
Yeah, that's a great point. It sounds like there's, of course, a balance to strike, but you want to kind of push the frontiers a little bit and make people think. And so if it's too safe of a panel presentation,
Yes.
It might be very credible, but they're hiring because they want a C-level leader that's probably going to push the envelope a little bit.
Yeah, it's a really fine balance, because obviously you don't want to come in and say, everything here sucks and your marketing is terrible. And, so but you also don't want someone to come in and, again, just give you the bland ChatGPT playbook. And so I think, threading the needle, and I am, obviously, you know me for many years, I'm very opinionated. And I think that has always served me well, because I come in and I say, hey, this is what you're doing great. These are really big opportunities. Like, you guys are not doing this well. And this is what's exciting. And this is how you can really change things. These are really big opportunities. And that's what C-level people are looking for. I mean, they're not looking for someone to play it safe. They're looking for someone to come in with really strong opinions and say, like, there's lots of great, new, interesting, exciting, different ways to do this. And that's what you should bring, that energy.
Jessica, it sounds like you retain a search firm that probably helps with some of the sourcing for these projects. Yeah. So I would be curious, like, when you see the resumes, like, it sounded like, hey, you're leery of falling in love with beautiful logos from famous companies. Yeah. If anything, maybe a little suspect of them. What do you look for in the resume when you're scanning it for a CMO kind of search?
Yeah, it's really hard. And I think generally what I'm looking for is, again, going back to, if our most important thing is demand gen, then what I'm looking for is someone that has really strong demand gen experience, but also that well-rounded. So I want to see that they haven't just spent 20 years or 15 years doing demand gen. I want to see that they have a little broader experience than that. So I'm looking for someone with an expertise that's important to us, but that has shown that they have started a company, or maybe done content, or has these kind of broader experience. That's really important to me. The other thing I'm looking for is similar types of customers. So I'm typically, like, if they're all B2C, or if they're all, like, so say that we are a PLG brand, we, sell 5K deals, or, I'm looking for someone that hasn't either been all consumer or has worked at Salesforce and has only sold, $100K to $1 million deals. So that's really important, is just understanding how much they understand our customer and how familiar they'd be with our model.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Maybe one last follow-up question before I close it out. How do you feel about CMO candidates that have always done one type, like, let's say you're working on a B2C CMO search and you're looking at candidates that have always done B2C, and there's just like at every level. And then other candidates that have kind of done a little bit of a lot of things and they've been very successful, but they're not like a dyed in the wool, 20-year B2C person.
Yeah.
Like, how do you think about those two types?
I think either could be equally successful. And so I think it really is. So I wouldn't say one is a better candidate than the other. And I think some of the most successful candidates have been ones that have bounced between lots of different companies, because they have a fluidity and a flexibility that I think is really important in marketing. So I think that there's a lot of benefit to that, but there's also a ton of benefit to having someone that has just incredibly deep experience. And so I think it really is just evaluating both, meeting with both. And the thing that I am just testing for is, it's my number one thing that I'm testing for, is I just cannot hire someone that's just bringing a playbook and it's just taking the same thing. And there's a lot of them out there. That's why I keep mentioning it, because that is very common in marketing. Is just take the playbook, you hire the same people, and you just do it over and over again. And maybe you used to be able to do it. You can't do it these days. technology is moving too fast. You can't do it. And so the thing I'm looking for is someone that has a level of creativity and a level of flexibility and kind of first principles thinking.
Love it. So if I had to summarize, I heard a number of things. Some that come to mind are: don't hire a CMO before you have market fit. Don't prematurely bring a CMO in. The second one I heard was bring the right kind of CMO for your biggest company problem that you're facing, like whether it's demand gen or messaging or product marketing. And then the third one was in the panel presentation, look for people that can push the envelope, can go deep, can be creative and adaptive, and passionate and articulate. Are anything else that you wanted to highlight? Because those are great tips right off the bat.
That was as good as a ChatGPT summary. So good job, Tom.
I love it. I really appreciate you coming on the show, Jess. How can people kind of, stay tuned and learn more about what you're thinking, about marketing and leadership these days?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best way. I try to post every once in a while. I'm sometimes better at it, sometimes I'm worse at it, but usually am posting a decent amount. So follow me on LinkedIn.
Love it. I have a link to your LinkedIn profile in the description below. Really appreciate it. And I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Tom.
Take care, Jess. Bye. All right. Super smart. That is a very high signal to noise ratio communicator. Not a surprise that a lot of people are trying to convince Jess to become a full-time CMO again. I don't think she wants to do that. But if you want help hiring a CMO, I would definitely ask her. Yeah, if I were running a company and needed a CMO, I'd definitely engage Jess's services. I already shared the takeaways from Jess. I think from a product management point of view, I would just highlight number one, we think we're really smart, us product managers and product leaders. But I kind of agree with her that the most important thing that we can do is gauge a CMO candidate's chemistry. How well could we work with this person, culture fit. But in terms of are they masters of marketing? And do they bring all the CMO skills to the table? I think we can figure out how we would partner with them on product strategy and roadmap and big bets. But we definitely probably would also need to rely on other people who are, in depth on marketing leadership to really assess the marketing stuff. Now, the one thing I would do if I were interviewing a CMO candidate in any organization that I was working in is I would probably ask them about a recent 52-48 decision that we had to make that involved marketing, or where marketing was like a key component of the decision, and just kind of test drive, okay, what would it be like to workshop this together? Is their worldview completely different and contradictory to how you're thinking as a product leader, or does it complement and maybe sharpen your thinking, or giving you a perspective that you hadn't considered? But yeah, other than that, I think Jess gave some pretty good advice. If you found this interview helpful and you want to stay on top of them, of course you can follow me wherever you're watching me now, but then also subscribe to my free Fireside PM Substack, and you'll probably in a week or two get a long form summary of this interview with the takeaways, with the embedded video. So it's a good way to stay on top of things if you want to have an additional way to catch up on all the latest conversations that are happening here. With that, I'm going to ask us to get back to work, and I'll see you next time, team. Bye.